the balance of the hour from this meeting.
Exactly. Yeah, I just got a free hour given back to me. It's great.
Well, this ought to be quick, right?
All right,
You started off by saying that.
All right, it is 2:32 and we are here for a discussion with,
Did you? Okay, no, you're fine. Yeah, you're good. She gave me the crazy face of, are we doing everything right? I think we're okay. Go ahead, Commissioner. My apologies.
all right, it is 2:32 and we are here for a meeting with our planning director regarding the hearing examiner. With that, we'll turn it over to Director DeBell.
So today you have one agenda item. Well, and it's an action item. I left it as an action item in case the board wanted to make a decision today. This is a holdover or a request by the board from the last update meeting we had. I think it was last month, where we had an action item on if we want to continue the use of a hearing examiner. So we've invited Jackie here today, who's our current hearing examiner. I provided to the board earlier today, so my apologies for the delay on it, a memorandum, and I can share that on the screen. It's also in your guys' G Drive for your review. And if you want a physical copy, I have one here. I gave a copy to Jackie as well and email it to her. So this memo, give me a second and I'll share it. It has a lot of additional information, but the 2 pages that are really the meat of it all, it goes through the background of why we have a hearing examiner. It goes through some statutory and then some history with the statutes, the relevant statutes that pertain to appointing a hearing examiner, and then the timeline, which I think was the main crux of what the board wanted from me, if I remember right. So for the board's knowledge, the April 21st of 2009, Mr. Charlie A. Gay was appointed as the hearing examiner. From what I see, he acted in that role through about 2012, 2013. I don't have a letter of resignation or anything in our documentation. What we do see is that the files go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission out of the hearing examiner's hands around that time in 2012, 2013, if I remember right. And in 2017, there was some advertisements to fill the vacancy. There was a Mr. John Poland who considered the position. I even see the resolutions drafted for him. I called Director Ollerton and asked him, what's the history there? Because the documentation wasn't great. He told me that John had came about and he really wanted a full-time position, not a contract role. So he decided the contract role wasn't enough for him personally, so he backed out of the idea. He was never appointed. So then there were some more advertisements for the hearing examiner position again in 2020. And then in June 21st is when Ms. Rucker here was appointed as a hearing examiner, and there's a resolution. So any questions on the process, the timeline, or what the authority is of the hearing examiner before I move on to the next page? Great.
Actually, I have a question clarification point. So if I understand correctly, starting with state statute, and then from state statute deriving our county ordinance, it appears that state statute allows for the zoning commission or the hearing examiner to either grant or deny applications or to submit a recommendation to the board.
Correct.
For those applications, whereas our county ordinance has outlined that certain types of applications are to be granted or denied by either the hearing examiner or the zoning commission, as compared to just making recommendations. So that's a decision that we as a county in the past have made with the roles and responsibilities, but we have flexibility with how we want to handle that based on statute. Is that accurate?
With the only caveat that maybe it's not in the sections I gave to the board, but the hearing examiner does have the ability to provide a recommendation to the zoning commission to have them hold a hearing. So that's something similar to state statute. Rather than sending it to the board, she has the ability to send it to the zoning commission for further proceedings, and she's done that a couple of times.
You're right, that is in statute. I just didn't read that part of it.
Okay. And I did follow up after our Title 12 conversation. I believe that was last week. And I think these code sections were discussed at that time as well under a different light. But I followed up with Mr. Wilson about the legality of limiting what the hearing examiner can do and whether or not the zoning commission can appoint a hearing examiner, if we can take that ability away given it's within LUPA. He believes that sorry to go a little bit off track, but you started it. So he believes that because the zoning commission is an appointed board, that you can delegate to them what authority you want, and you can not give them the authority to appoint a hearing examiner and leave that solely on the board. So I think that's a follow-up to some of the questions the board had at that.
It is, I appreciate that clarification.
Okay. Any other questions on that before I move on?
That was my question, thank you.
So I have a summary here of the current appointment. So Ms. Rucker's just kind of a little bit of a summary of her contract, what the costs are. So again, she's an independent contractor. There's all that documentation there for you to review. There's some supporting materials in her resume and application's been included in here as well. I put together a rough pros and cons, and I tried to capture kind of a high-level review, pros and cons of having a hearing examiner. This is not by any means inclusive of all of the pros and cons of having a hearing examiner. I intended this to be kind of a thought experiment for the board here, and then just to spur some ideas and what are we looking at as far as like the benefits versus the downfalls or the pros and cons of having a hearing examiner. So that concludes everything I have, unless you guys have any other questions for me, and Jackie's here as well to answer any questions.
Director, under the,
Excuse me 1 minute. Can I ask Commissioner Corn, do you have any questions?
So where does the money come from to pay the hearing examiner?
Yep, so I did put some costs. I didn't go really into the nitty gritty on it. Right now, we charge the applicants the hearing examiner cost, and so it's a pass-through. So if you look at purely the financial aspect of it, like I put it in here, some of these hearings are all held during the day, so there's no overtime or comp time. There's no mileage reimbursement or meals provided, so there really is a no cost to the county. That cost is transferred to the applicant, and then she bills us once a quarter, every 2 months, once a month. So we pay her out through the normal claims process. Versus the zoning commission, those meetings are held in the evenings. I put some pros and cons to that as well. We have public involvement versus less public involvement potential, right? During the time of the hearings. And then the cost of holding those hearings with the zoning commission. Those are volunteers. We don't pay them. We do reimburse mileage, and we provide a meal for them in the evenings. And then we do occasionally have comp time that is accrued, because a lot of the people that attend from my staff, those hearings are hourly employees.
Anything further, Commissioner?
No, I just make a statement, I guess, real quick. I've been to some of those hearings during business hours and standing room only, and you got to park down at the pizza place. So it might limit some of the public, but I guess kind of hard. I see in the pros and the cons, a lot of cans, may, so it's, I understand.
It's not super definitive. Like I said, it's more of to help you guys think through some of the pros and cons as I saw it. So
That's all I have.
Commissioner Donkey?
so, yeah, I was going to go to the compensation fee piece, like Commissioner Corn, so that's helpful. And obviously, when we pass through costs, those are costs that are borne, by the applicants, which are oftentimes, citizens in the county. That said, however, we do, I think, have to look at, the overall costs when it comes to other county staff and things like the director was speaking about. So I think there is a balancing there. Some of the pros and cons, looking at the idea, the reduction of burden on the volunteer commission. I think, Director, and I apologize, I didn't mention this to you again ahead of time, but in one of our prior meetings, you talked a little bit about volume of applications that come in. Could you speak to that? Do you have rough numbers as far as the volume of applications we see that end up coming before the hearing examiner as compared to the zoning commission?
I gave you at the last update meeting a breakdown of those. I believe it was about a 1/3, 2/3. I think it was something like 60 and then 120. So about 60 went to the hearing examiner 120 went to the hearing examiner. About 60 items were heard in front of the zoning commission, if I remember that, and I could pull that up here in a minute if you like.
That's about what I recall as well. Just trying to think about that volume and how it impacts dealing with a volunteer group. I think that can become pretty burdensome. The and to me, again, there's a balance of, I'm not looking to rush applications through a process, but I also don't want to intentionally make it, be a slow, inefficient process. And so I think that when we consider the volume and how long an individual hearing can take, I can see where it would become concerning to go back to having all of those hearings be on the volunteer commission. I also think there's a piece to having somebody who has professional background of experience associated with these areas, and just associated with clear deliberation process. Whereas with the volunteers, it's great that we have members of the community, but we also have diverse backgrounds that oftentimes do not directly apply to that process. And we have to work with who we can find that is willing to volunteer, since it's a significant commitment. So I'm just trying to weigh these pros and cons in my mind. This is really helpful information for me to think through, and wanted to gain a better understanding about how and why it's being utilized. It's common for members of the community to ask questions about that, and not having all the information, I don't want to inappropriately answer questions with incorrect information. So this is useful. The part of this for me as well is trying to create as much consistency as we can with how we're trying to interpret and apply our county code, from an appointed commission of volunteers to an appointed or contracted professional, and then the board ourselves. And as a new board, trying to figure out how we build as much consistency as we can with how we interpret the county code, and try to maintain a responsiveness to the community who applies for these different permits in a way that is as clear and consistent as possible. I think, Jackie, you'd indicated that.
Can I pause for a
sorry.
second? Since Jackie hasn't gone, if we don't have anything else from him, can we let him sit down and have her do a presentation so we keep the flow of it? Because you're...
Sure.
Have a presentation.
Well, before you said that you wanted to talk about what your roles were and your professional background was.
Oh, I
Patience
can,
with-
yeah, I can do that. I didn't really make a presentation. Just
That's
because
okay. You
I'm
can
gonna
just
be
grab-
answer questions.
You can grab the microphone and
As you're
you
talking.
don't have to stand up, you can just pull that thing.
Actually, I've been sitting all day, so it feels really good to
Yeah.
stand.
All right, so state what you wanted to state, and then if you want us just to ask questions at the end, just let us know,
Okay.
and then we can go back and forth and ask you questions.
Okay, so my name is Jackie Rucker. I'm a Bonner County resident and also the Bonner County Hearing Examiner. I didn't really put a presentation together. I know there was concerns, though, regarding me being an engineer. I heard that at the last, and that was one of the things I just wanted to bring up. Was I did notice in the state statutes that they do state that the hearing examiner should be I believe it's a certified planner, an architect, engineer, along that level. I've been an engineer for over 33 years. I've worked across 5 different industries. So I'm really good at reading codes, understanding comprehensive plans. I've worked with agencies from city all the way up to federal, pretty much everybody that you could think of almost. But I don't think that's the point. I feel like the focus was kind of put on me more than it was as a person, than it was the actual position. And so I just wanted to say that was my comment here, was looking at the files. He had up on the screen there, I think it was 129 files by me, 60 by the zoning commission, and that was up till last month, I believe, sometime. I think what having the hearing examiner position does is it does bring someone in with some professional experience, but it does not mean I am the final say or that person is the final say. They can appeal And I hope people understand that. They can appeal that decision to the zoning commission, and then if they don't like what the zoning commission says, they appeal it up to you guys, I believe. So there is a process there. It's not a final thing. I know another concern was that the hearing examiner is not an elected official. But I think part of the benefit to that is there's no political sway there. I'm not, as a hearing examiner, I'm not worried that I'm going to have to be reelected in a month and worry about the decisions might affect that reelection, which I know that's kind of a concern for some. Also, I noticed with the requirements for the zoning and planning commission, they only need to be residents for 2 years, and I didn't see any professional experience at all, other than an interest in planning and zoning, land use, which is great. But I actually, as a hearing examiner, it is required in there that I do have some form of that experience. So I just think that it just brings that little bit of a professional edge there. But I don't want to insult anybody. I think everybody's doing a great job, and it's not an easy job. I had my eyes opened up big time with the Panhandle Bike Ranch. So, yeah, it's a big job. I really think it's just more of an efficiency thing than anything. And just, again, having that other person in there that has that level of professional experience versus volunteer, we want to get involved. But, so I don't know if you guys have questions or.
I believe you mentioned last time a little bit about methodology or process that you use as you approach a file. It'd be really helpful to me to hear a little bit more about your thought process with that.
So the planning department puts everything on the Google Drive for me to look at, and I'm given a few days to go over everything that's been submitted. And then I come into the hearing and they present it formally to me. And then it's opened up for the applicant to give their presentation, and then there's public comment. And then I basically deliberate, make the decision. But leading up to that hearing, a lot of times I will take time on my own. I like to use the assessor's public map, take a look at the oversight, see what's going on. For instance, I had an application where they did not realize that the airstrip that they wanted to put in would have them flying out over MacArthur Lake Wilderness, the wildlife refuge. I didn't really think they were at first either until I looked it up myself and saw there was this buffer zone that was impacted. So it helped educate me, not just in the fact that the neighbors obviously didn't want it out there, but I wanted to have a little bit more educated reason for my answers. And it doesn't mean that I walked in there thinking, nope, not going to give it to them, because there were points during the conversations and the presentations where my opinion was like, okay, but going back to the code, no, you're still, this agency says no, and here's the reason why, and I trust Fish and Game to be the professionals when it comes to the wildlife, so, I trust that. But yeah, there can be opinions swayed one way or another. When you walk in, you kind of have your mind set up, but then that's what I like about the hearing is you get all the public comment, you get the applicants to actually give their version of it, explain why they think they should be allowed to do it. And then bottom line though, is you still have to go back to the code or the plan if that's what's applicable. But that's kind of the whole process for me. Like with the Panhandle Bike Ranch, I did choose to add conditions that I thought would help make people, okay, let's take into consideration what the neighborhood wants and what the applicant wants and see if I can come up with a happy compromise, and then found out nobody liked it. So I guess I did my job. So that's, I guess, I don't know if I've covered everything there for you guys. I do tend to take my 5 days to deliberate at times. I will take that if I feel like I need to dig into the comments, especially if I get a lot of public comment. Or if other agencies came up with stuff that maybe they didn't present originally. I like to dig into that, so I will take the 5 business days also. And then I write my own, most of the time, these guys will give me a draft copy of a decision letter, but if they're slammed, I'll just write it myself and then, send it back to them and they send it off to the applicant, so.
Any more questions, Commissioner Donkey?
No, not for me.
Commissioner Corn?
So sometimes you do take the full 5 days to look at the file, read it over and everything.
I do.
Is there an additional compensation for all of that time?
No, I'm paid by the file. So however long it takes me is on me. Yeah,
So you get $225 for doing something like the bike park deal.
yeah, no matter how long it takes me. Yeah.
Sure you want to keep doing this?
I actually enjoy it. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I actually, I actually enjoy it. I'm a big researcher and I'm a nerd, big time engineering nerd. So I love digging into all that kind of stuff. I love finding out what's going on around the county, what projects are up. I love to see how things start and how they finish and what impacts they have. And so, yeah, I really enjoy it. But
So I have another question, but I'm not sure if it's to you or not. I'm not quite sure why we're here, or maybe I forgot why we're here.
So I brought up.
Why are we discussing this?
I brought up at one of our prior planning department update meetings, I asked the director to put on the agenda just to do a review of the use of a hearing examiner, because I've had a lot of public comments to me asking about why we use a hearing examiner, should we use a hearing examiner? And so I wanted to just have that open discussion because, I didn't claim to have all of the background and details. And so it's like, well, let's ask the question and have a discussion. And if the board wants to change anything, then, we would have to make a decision to do so, but we don't have to change anything. But if we don't know whether or not it's working well from our perspective, then I wanted to be able to go through a review so that we could respond to those community questions that are, at least I've been receiving. That was the reason why it ended up on a prior agenda for the planning
feels
department. But during that meeting, as I recall, we felt that we needed more information, and there wasn't time in that meeting on that agenda to dig into it at that level.
Okay.
All right, anything further from planning?
Nope.
Anything further from you?
just if it's okay for me to ask, where were those comments? Were they posted were they emailed to you guys, or how did you receive them?
I get emails, I get phone calls, people
Okay.
in person that come, and it could be related to a specific file or it could just be generic. But I have had a number of people asking about that. And so it was anytime I don't have, know all the answer to a detailed answer to a question, then I want to bring it up so that we can address it publicly.
Okay, so are those comments posted, made public at any point, or?
Typically only if somebody brings it forward in a public meeting.
Okay.
But yeah, so I could get a phone call, an email, I could have somebody say, hey, can I sit down and have a meeting with you? I have some people that literally have a page of 5-6 different topics they want to talk to me about, and that could just be one of a whole variety of departments in the county that they wanted to speak to me about. And so a lot of it, I think, as I recall, majority of it had to do with why are we using a hearing examiner? And then some of it was about, the authorities and so forth, which obviously that's easier to look in the code and just say, well, here's what the authority is. But answering the question why is kind of a bigger picture discussion.
Yeah, okay.
And that's where it's great, in my opinion, for us to talk through and understand what's the volume, what does that look like? I can say my personal perspective is that I appreciate the folks who commented that they prefer to have decisions on land use files made by elected body of individuals. However, when we talk a volume of 180, 200 additional files, I don't see any practical way in which the Board of County Commissioners could be the only decision-making body
Right.
to handle that volume on top of the ones that we already have to make decisions on. So I think there's a practical aspect. While I appreciate and agree with the sentiment that I hear from folks about trying to focus on their elected representatives making decisions as much as possible, there becomes a practical side to it that I think we wouldn't be able to manage. So that's my opinion on that aspect of it. So better understanding that is helpful to me. And The other thing that has come up that I've had one or two folks ask about is the duration of the contract with the hearing examiner and whether or not that's something that we would reconsider on an annual or,
It's
biannual
forever.
basis.
Just kidding.
And so, I mean, as I understand right now, the way it's written is essentially it continues until one party decides to terminate. And so, that's, I think, something, if the board wants to continue with the use of a hearing examiner as ordinance currently states, then I think it's a worthwhile question to say, is that something that would make sense to open back up for additional applicants on an annual or biannual basis? Some sort of a term to say, we just want to consider who else has an interest and who we think would be the best fit. And it's not about anything specifically,
Oh, no,
Jackie. It's
I
just,
get that.
again, from a process perspective, what's the best process for the county to utilize?
There's nothing stopping the board from appointing more than one. Like Kootenai County, I believe, has 3 hearing examiners. There's some counties that share a hearing examiner between several different counties. I think, given the size that we are as a county, we're pretty lucky to have a hearing examiner. It's hard to find someone that meets this qualification. You can kind of see in the timeline where the county attempted several times in different years to recruit one and either got somebody or didn't get somebody. So just kind of a food for thought. I was talking to one of my planners who used to work in Western Washington, and they recruited for many years and never got a hearing examiner, and it was about the same size county as we are, so about 50,000. So.
Good feedback.
Any further questions for the board?
No, just wanted to point out again, though, just as, like you were saying, the concern about elected officials, neither the zoning or planning commissioning members are elected. And I noticed again in the requirements, they don't have to have a background in planning or land use. So it might be good for the public to understand that, it is a volunteer position and it is definitely a good thing to have. But when they're concerned about credentials and things like that, you have 12 people making decisions that don't actually have that background specifically.
Right, that's a point well taken.
I mean, it's good though, because you're getting a wide
There's
variety across
more-
the county. So that is good.
There's more to planning and zoning commission to just the volunteers and aspect of it, because you're pulling from different areas of the county with different knowledge about the areas that they come from. So, any other questions for the board?
I don't think so.
All right,
Thank you.
it is 2:59 and this meeting is adjourned. So if you want a decision, you'll bring it back on a different meeting, because that information didn't come until an hour. I saw it come across our screen, we were in a meeting, so that we can review it kind of deal. So I asked whether or not this was going to be a decision for our board, given that didn't come to us before. So you can put it on, if you want her to short set it for Tuesday for a decision, you can ask her on your way through it if you want a decision on it. Nothing changes, because you only have to vote to undo something essentially, so.
Right, so if a commissioner would like to make a change, then they can request to have an action item put on a future agenda, is the way I would. Otherwise,